University of Iowa student Xiangnan Li admits he killed his girlfriend Tong Xiao. This case began in 2014 when Xiao, a student at Iowa State, went missing. Nearly 3 weeks later, her body was found in Iowa City, and Li had fled to China.
On September 18, 2014, 19-year-old Xiao Tong was reported missing by her roommates after she did not return from a week-long getaway. Her uncharacteristic behavior had raised concerns among her closest friends. The Ames Police Department began investigating the matter without causing alarm, but the investigation soon revealed clues that pointed to a sinister motive, leading them on an international manhunt. Xiao Tong was born on November 12, 1994 in Dalian, China. She was the only child of Xiao Chuanxiang, a food safety officer, and Yang Shui, a homemaker. Tong began studying at Dalian Yuming Senior High School in Dean in 2008, an institution known for producing high-achieving students, but her future plans changed after graduating from high school in 2008 to 2011. Tong and her high school boyfriend both entered the Olympic competition, which offered the winners the opportunity to enter prestigious Chinese universities without having to write the Gaokao. Tong's boyfriend had the equivalent of an entrance exam. But Tong was unsuccessful, which led them to part ways, and for Tong, who had made other plans for her future to study abroad in the United States. In 2011, Tong went on to write the test of English as a foreign language, passed, and was accepted to study chemical engineering at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. Tong began her studies in September 2012, and would go on to make quite an impression with fellow students and professors. Apart from that, though she'd been in a relationship with a fellow Chinese student named Li Xiangnan, whom she met while studying for the English exam in China in late 2011. Over the next 2 years, Tong continued to maintain a good grades, and she and Li also appeared to be going strong as a couple. On September 5, 2014, Tong and Li decided to get away from the stress of university life and booked budget inn suites in the nearby town of Nevada, Iowa. They'd visited the motel frequently in the last 2 years, just to spend quality time with each other. On September 7, 2014, Tong messaged her friend Jean to let her know she decided to go visit some friends in Minnesota, and would be missing a few extra days of classes. At the same time, she informed Jean that Li had to go back to China due to an emergency, and that she'd be using his phone for the time being because she'd lost her own. Jean began contacting mutual acquaintances she'd shared with Tong from Minnesota. To her astonishment, these friends told Jean that they hadn't seen or heard from Tong in a while. A short search of social media showed that Tong had definitely vanished. On September 18, 2014, a concerned Jean contacted the Ames Police Department and reported Tong missing. Police initially believed that Tong had grown homesick and decided to return to China to be with her family, which was not an uncommon occurrence among foreign students. But after speaking with Tong's closest friends, they soon realized that Tong had adapted well to living in Iowa and did not show any outward signs of homesickness, prompting them to take a closer look at Tong's last known movements. Through conversations with friends, investigators were able to ascertain that Tong and Li had arrived at the motel's location on September 5, 2014. This was also confirmed by the establishment's owner, Ken Patel, who had known the couple from their prior trip. Ken claimed that he'd observed Tong roaming about the lobby of the motel alone herself on September 6, 2014. The couple were also spotted on CCTV camera footage from a nearby gas station buying water. Nothing was out of the ordinary, but Ken then highlighted something he found peculiar about their last visit. It was early on Sunday morning, and the couple's automobile was not in the parking lot. Ken told officers it was odd because the couple normally overstayed their visit and were often asked to leave their room. He also told police that no one had actually checked them out on September 7, 2014, and the security cameras were faulty, so there was no footage of them checking out. Police now turned their attention to checking bus and flight manifestos to see if Tong had indeed gone to Minnesota or took a flight out to China. This lead would turn out to be a dead end, as police also obtained a search warrant for Lisa's apartment and the motel room in order to find answers about Tong's disappearance. When they arrived at Li's apartment, they discovered that groceries had been left unpacked on the counter, a spoiled carton of milk was on the table, and luggage had been left behind, indicating that Li had left Iowa in a hurry and did not have time to clean up. In the motel room, police found several small splatters of a reddish-brown substance on the headboard and the wall. However, since this was not yet a criminal investigation, the warrant did not allow for the collection of forensic evidence. It was also possible that the spots could have been left behind by any of the other guests who had used the room after Tong and Li. To collect evidence, police would need to obtain another search warrant to conduct a forensic examination. In the meantime, police turned to their only lead, Li's phone, which Tong had been using. They hoped that by tracking the movements and data from the cell phone, it might eventually lead them to Tong. But the case was about to take an unexpected turn. After receiving data from the cell phone records, police were able to map out Tong's movements, as she was the last known person to use the phone between September 5 and 8, 2014. One number had been called frequently, and it belonged to a young man named Paul, a friend of Li. These calls had been made from Ames, Iowa. Upon closer review of the records, it was revealed that the message Tong had sent to her friend, claiming she was leaving Iowa City and heading to Minnesota, had actually originated from a cell tower in Chicago. However, there was no cell phone anywhere near Minnesota, and what confused the police even more was a call made from Li's cell phone that did not match any of their information. The call had come from China, and according to the message allegedly sent by Tong, Li had left his phone with her when he decided to fly out to China. The police decided it was time to interview Tong and Li's friends, so they contacted Paul and called him in for an interview.
Paul, I know that we talked on the phone already. We know that there were some transactions between you and Mr. Li, and we're just kind of curious how that all came to fruition.
Oh, I actually pinged him first. I said, "How are you doing?" And then he said, "Hey, Paul, can you help me to take a look at the ticket? Can you help me to see if I can go back to China sometime next week?" I said, "Okay." He's a good friend of mine, so I helped him to get the tickets. That is on September 6th. I was like, "Hey, you have school, right? Why would you have to go all of a sudden?" He says this is an emergency. Just said emergency. I said, "Okay." When I asked him, "Do you need me to help you out to get the return ticket?" He said, "Don't worry about it. His mom will take care of it for him."
It was a one-way ticket is what you purchased, is that right?
Yes.
Over the next few days, police worked on piecing together the relationship between Tong and Li. Tong had admitted to her friends that her parents found Li to be shy and respectful, but were unsure if he was a good match for her. She had also described it as a casual relationship. According to her friends, the couple appeared to have a loving bond, but over time, cracks began to show. Upon arriving in the U.S., pursued her studies in Iowa, while Li moved to New York. However, the long distance proved difficult for Li, and he transferred to a university in Iowa to be closer to Tong. Li moved in with Tong and her friends, but things did not go well. His behavior became unbearable, and he was eventually asked to move out. Despite this, after Li moved out in 2013, he and Tong continued their relationship and saw each other more often over the next 2 years. However, the differences in their personalities became more apparent. Tong was known for being very social, while Li wanted her to be exclusively his. Tong's friends, Ji and Amy, noticed her personality shifting. She became withdrawn and somber. Tong confided in her friends that Li was very possessive and did not like her having many friends. Eventually, Tong developed romantic feelings for a new friend. She told her friends she planned to use an upcoming weekend trip to finally end her relationship with Li. However, Tong disappeared. These revelations took on a new significance when police made a shocking discovery on the afternoon of September 26, 2014. Police officers in Iowa City confirmed the discovery of Tong's car in an apartment complex parking lot. Residents reported that the car had been parked in the same spot for several weeks. A distinct odor was coming from the car as police awaited a search warrant to confirm their worst fears. Inside the trunk of the car was a suitcase containing a decomposing body with a bloody towel wrapped around the head and a 6-kilogram dumbbell. Although police needed an autopsy to confirm the identity of the body, they were certain they had found Xiao Tong. They also discovered information about Li's travel plans, and on the front passenger seat, a smashed phone believed to belong to Tong was also found. The autopsy confirmed that the body was indeed Tong's, but due to the advanced decomposition, the precise time of death could not be determined. Tong's death was ruled a homicide, caused by blunt force trauma to the head and asphyxiation. The medical examiner noted that it was possible Tong had been placed in the suitcase while still alive and suffocated due to lack of oxygen. The discovery of Tong's body allowed police in Nevada, Iowa, to conduct a forensic sweep of the motel room that Tong and Li had shared on the weekend she disappeared. The blood on the headboard and walls tested positive for Tong, and lumen testing revealed that blood had been quickly cleaned away from other parts in the room. The towel used to wrap her head mirrored the towels provided at the motel. While forensic investigators sought to collect additional physical evidence, other police teams obtained video footage of Li purchasing the identical luggage Tong was discovered in at a TJ Maxx and dumbbells from a Walmart in Nevada. Li had officially become the main person of interest in Tong's death, but authorities were still mystified as to what had led to her murder. They couldn't comprehend how Li, who was described as reserved and quiet, could have become so enraged and killed Tong. After reviewing his cell phone records once more, they discovered an abnormally long phone call made by Li in the days preceding Tong's murder. The phone number belongs to Li's female friend.
Did he ever talk about his relationship with Tong Xiao?
Yeah. We would be nosy and ask him about, how they met, when they got together.
What did he say about their relationship?
He said that they're, a very calm, chill couple.
Were there any issues with their relationship that you know of?
Not until, September 3rd, when he rang me saying he called his girlfriend and then she butt picked up over her conversation with another guy that said mean things about him and their relationship, and that it might not last as long as people think it would.
After hanging up the phone, Li rushed to social media and posted that his life was ended. He did not post anything after that. Karen tried to contact Li again on his birthday, September 16, 2014. But received no response. She found this surprising because Li was generally quick to respond to communications. Police began to develop a notion about what Li had planned. They suspected that after overhearing Tong and her friends talk, Li decided to confront her about what he had heard over the weekend. Following a physical fight with Tong on the night of September 6, 2014, Li fled the motel and went to buy a bag to place her body in. He then purchased dumbbells and placed one in the luggage, planning to weigh it down and discard it in a nearby river. After cleaning the room, he departed the hotel early the next morning to avoid being seen. He drove to Iowa City and planned to bury her body in the Skunk River. Li's cell phone records verified this notion, indicating that he was near the river between 3 and 4 a.m. on Sunday, September 7, 2014. When he realized this plan would not work, He drove to his apartment complex, parked Tong's car in the parking lot, and began making plans to fly back home to China. During their investigation, police discovered that Lee had been using Tong's phone and pretending to be her by responding to text messages. Lee then damaged Tong's phone to avoid any further communication with her friends and family. Instead, he sent texts from his phone to her friends pretending to be Tong. Police tracked his travel patterns using his phone data and the trip information they acquired from flight manifestos. Lee had flown from Iowa to Chicago, where he waited for a connecting flight to China. After the flight was delayed, Lee decided to fly to Los Angeles and take another flight to China. He'd reached China and cleared customs on September 10, 2014, making his escape. But there were more complications ahead. After Lee had reached China, he'd vanished into thin air, and no one had been able to make contact with him or heard from him since he arrived in his home country, further complicating the situation. China and the United States did not have an extradition treaty in effect at the time of Tong's murder. Without this policy, there was no certainty that the Chinese government would be willing to have Lee return to the U.S. to face first-degree murder charges. But the Johnson County District Attorney moved ahead and filed the charges in March 2015. In China, the murder of Tong had attracted headlines because she too was a Chinese national whose promising future had been cut short by an act of jealousy. Reporters from Lee's hometown of Yu launched an online campaign to find out where he'd been hiding. Efforts to contact him proved impossible, but that didn't stop the public from spreading his photos on social media sites and raising awareness about his role in Tong's murder. In April 2015, Tong's father, Xiao Chunzheng, made an anguished plea to both the American and Chinese governments to work together to bring justice to his family and honor his daughter's memory. This strategy appeared to work as Wenzhou police began tracking Lee's movements. However, every time they were about to apprehend Lee, he managed to flee. An investigating team from China eventually flew to the United States and worked with their American counterparts to interview witnesses and examine crime scene evidence from their perspective. The team returned to China after learning about the crime firsthand and hearing witness accounts. As the case gained pace in China, Lee found himself trapped in the country he had assumed would protect him. In an unexpected change of events, Lee turned himself in to authorities in May 2015. While Lee was detained in Wenzhou, the Criminal Bureau of Investigation in the United States began to establish their case against him. In June 2015, Lee's trial was tried in China because both he and the victim, Tong, were Chinese nationals. The Minister of Public Security in China announced that although the crime had occurred in the U.S., it would be tried under Chinese law. Lee was charged with intentional murder, which carried with it the possibility of execution for the crime if he was found guilty. However, under Iowa law, the charge carried a life sentence without the possibility of parole because the death penalty had been abolished in March 2016. Lee's trial began at the Intermediate People's Company. The U.S. government requested the Chinese ministry to reconsider the death penalty and sent an inquiry team to China to observe the trial. Lee pleaded guilty to the charges, but insisted that it was an impulsive and irrational act on his part. He also stated that he loved Tong, but couldn't deal with the affairs she was having while studying at university. He went on to tell the court that he did not plan the murder and had purchased his plane ticket days earlier because he had always planned to return to China. During the proceedings, Tong's parents, who had not been allowed to be in the court, burst through the doors and told Lee that their lives had now become meaningless and that they were only filled with bitterness. The trial lasted only 6 hours and Lee received a life sentence rather than the death penalty. Lee's parents then contacted Tong's family and asked for forgiveness. They also offered Tong's parents $300,000 in compensation for Tong's death. In the end, two families were torn by this needless tragedy. It had taken an emotional toll on Tong's family, who had lost their beacon of hope in such a tragic manner. Xiao Tong's story is painful and heartbreaking, a bright young life cut short, and a family left to pick up the pieces. While a guilty plea and a sentence brought some measure of accountability, no legal outcome can erase the loss or the grief her loved ones continue to carry. If this episode raised questions for you, share your thoughts below. Thoughtful, respectful discussion helps keep these stories in the light. All of the facts and sources I used are linked in the description if you want to read more or verify anything I mentioned. If you found this video informative, please like and subscribe for more cases presented responsibly. Thank you for watching. Take care of one another and look out for the people around you. If this story stayed with you, please consider subscribing for more respectful, fact-based episodes.